Hey everybody, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I would like to show you my collection of philodendrons, but because I have so many of them, I thought I'll split it into a couple of parts. So today in part one, I really want to focus on my favorite of them all, the velvet philodendrons. Now, velvet philodendrons are really my absolute favorite indoor plant to grow. I prefer them over all the other genus that I grow. I definitely prefer them over Monstera, Anthurium, Alocasia, and so on. So they are absolutely my favorite. Velvet philodendrons is really one of the reasons I started this hobby in the first place. I was really fascinated by plants like the gloriosum, the melano, verrucosum that I saw online, and I really wanted to start growing these myself. I mean, seeing them online and so on really made me want to get them and grow them. But once you actually start growing them yourselves, I think any photos or videos online don't really do it justice. It's nothing really beats being able to feel the texture, see how the leaves change with the light, see that sheen that they have and so on. So I'm going to try and do a good job in kind of showing you that velvetness on screen today, but it probably won't translate. So if you get a chance to see any of these in real life, I highly recommend it. Anyway, so really these velvet philodendrons is what kickstarted my whole plant hobby, or what really got me into, or probably made this hobby into much more of a passion, I suppose. So most of these have been with me for around about 2 years or a little bit over 2 years. So most of these are quite mature specimen at this stage already. But I have separate plant spotlights on some of them already. So I'll link a playlist at the end about all things moss pole related and a playlist with all of my plant spotlights where I just focus on the journey one specific species and I have been through together and give you any tips and tricks that I can confidently pass on. Today's really more about showing you the variety there is within this genus of philodendrons, specifically with the velvet ones. And then in the second part, I'll focus on the non-velvet philodendrons that I've got growing in my apartment. So all of these are usually not growing in the spot where they are right now. I just moved them over here to record the video. It's going to be a little bit challenging because a lot of them are quite large. So it's kind of hard to get them all into frame, but I'll try my best. They're usually located in my bedroom, and I've got a houseplant tour on just focusing on that room and focusing on the setup, the grow lights, the natural light, airflow and so on, everything that I do in that room to make them thrive. But in a nutshell, I try and keep the humidity for all of these at around about 60-ish%, and the temperature usually never drops below 20 degrees Celsius during winter, but in summer I can easily reach 28, 29 and so on. I make sure that there's constant airflow, so I have a fan, and obviously I open my windows for airflow. I cannot stress enough how important fresh air and airflow is for your plants if you want them to thrive and you don't want to encounter any mold or fungal issues with them. All of these are watered approximately once a week. Well, that's during winter at least, because they're all in a humid environment, so they're kind of keeping each other moist. But during summer, I might have to switch that to, 2 times a week. But we'll see how we go. Ultimately, how often you need to water is really not the right question to ask. It's rather when you should be watering, and I always water before the pole fully dries out. But I have a more in-depth video on how I water and when I water in my moss pole playlist, which will be linked at the end screen anyway. I fertilize all of these weekly using my regular Growth Technology Australia foliage focus, and I just mix that in the water that I use to water the moss pole in themselves. All of the tall ones are on 180 centimeter moss poles, so that's 2 moss poles stacked on top of each other, and they're all potted in a 20 centimeter nursery pot using my aeroid mix, which, guess what, there's a video in my playlist which will be linked at the end screen and so on, right? So that's kind of the general about all of these that I'll show you today, so I don't need to kind of repeat it with every single plant that I show you. But as I said, I have plenty of other videos where I touch on all of these things in a little bit more depth. So if you want to learn more, please feel free to check out any of my other videos. Now, before I get started with the first species, I really would appreciate if you could give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Leave a nice comment if you appreciate these videos. Your engagement really encourages me to make more videos. So if you want me to continue making more videos, please engage with my content. Alrighty, let's start with Should we start left or right? Let's just start here. It's the easiest one. All right, let's start with Philodendron melanochrysum, or I like to refer to as Philodendron melanochrysum. This plant has been with me for a long time, probably I think 2.5 years. I got this one on the same day I got my verrucosum. I got this one a year earlier than my Glorious behind me. And it's really the one velvet philodendron that has not matured for me in the way that I would like for it to mature. It is definitely increasing in leaf size. So, I mean, these newest leaves are decent. I'm not complaining. But if I compare the progress to other species that I'm growing in the same room with the same conditions, it doesn't seem to appreciate my indoor conditions quite as much. So while it looks stunning, and it's definitely one of the most popular ones out there, and it has been tissue cultured in Australia as well, so it's readily available these days. You can even get it at Bunnings. If you are new to velvet philodendrons and you haven't really had much success with them in the past, I would not recommend getting this one straight up. I would definitely recommend getting one of the hybrids, because the hybrids are so much easier to grow and less fussy. Now, I've been experimenting a little bit with what the reason might be that it's not growing in the way that I wanted to, and I believe it's probably due to two things. First of all, it really appreciates high humidity and consistent high humidity. Now, I'm trying my best to provide it. Actually, I'm not trying my best. I'm doing nothing. The conditions are whatever it is. I don't use humidifiers. I don't like first of all, I don't like the look of them, and I also don't really like using a humidifier in an indoor environment. I don't really think that makes sense to me. If I'd had a greenhouse, that would be absolutely what I'd be doing. So it's really just getting the natural humidity that I got to offer, but the humidity, the moss pole definitely gives it a bit of a humidity boost. So I think maybe it's not quite getting enough humidity. And then some people have been telling me that it needs more light. Some people actually told me that it needs less light. So I'm still experimenting. That's why I haven't done a proper plant spotlight on this plant yet. I want to find out myself what it is that makes it mature in an indoor environment. Once I feel like I've found the solution, then I'll definitely want to share that with you. But at this stage, I don't really have too much knowledge about it just yet, because I haven't really had success with it, or not the success that I would like to have. So yeah, bear with me. But look, I'm not complaining. It at least is a really nice compact pole. I don't need to worry about it taking up too much space. So I'm really excited, and obviously these new leaves coming out are absolute stunning. And it has one of the nicest velvet textures as well, especially once the leaves are getting really nice and dark, like that sheen that, you know, mwah. Anyway, can highly recommend, but I wouldn't use it. I wouldn't buy it as like my first velvet plant, right? I would definitely only get into it once I've had success with other plants before. All right, just to switch it up a little bit, I've got a teeny tiny one over here. It is the newest addition to my velvet philodendron. Anyway, it is Philodendron lupinum. Now, it is teeny tiny, but at this stage, I have, I think, 4 or 5 plants in here. So it all started with just a one-node cutting that I got, and then I let it grow up a moss pole. I chopped it into 5 or 6 single-node cuttings, let all of them reshoot, and then I popped them all back on a pole. So it hasn't really matured at all since I got it, because I consistently chopped it, right? But I know that this plant it's going to be quite challenging to get to maturity in an indoor setting. I don't think I'll be able to give it the heat, humidity, and light requirements that it would really appreciate. So I'm expecting this to take a very long time to mature. So I figured instead of having one teeny tiny empty little stem growing on a moss pole, if it's not going to mature, let's at least make it into a very lush pole. And it has the cutest little heart-shaped leaves, and it has really nice red backs as well. So it is a nice addition that doesn't take up much space, but when this plant matures, it will actually really transform in leaf shape. It will eventually lose the velvet touch as well, and it will almost look like an anthurium when it matures. So it's going to be an interesting one to see go through the transition from juvenile to mature, but I'm not expecting that to be anytime soon. So I'm opting for a lush pole instead. All right, next one. They're all very similar at this stage. Wee. By the way, people keep asking me how I managed to just be able to pick up my poles by the my plants by the moss pole. And it's honestly just because the roots are holding everything together. I don't secure the pole to the pot or anything like that. It's all just because of the roots. Right, Philodendron micans. I do believe this would have been my first velvet philodendron, and it's probably the most readily available as well. I often see it being grown as a trailing plant, but if you let it mature, it can actually grow really, really large. Now, it's definitely in the neglected bucket. Usually when a plant reaches the top of its pole, I do my chop and extend, and I re-extend it so that the mature part can continue climbing, can continue maturing. Now with this one, I actually have no desire to make it grow any larger than this. I actually like having this really lush, compact pole that doesn't take up too much space. So when this plant reached the top of its moss pole, I just started letting it trail back down and then back up and back, up and down, up and down. So obviously when the plant trails down, that's not really natural. So you actually have to force every single node and pin it back into the pole because it will continuously want to climb up. And because it's kind of growing against its natural growth pattern, it's going to give you smaller leaves again if you let it climb down the pole. But that's totally fine. I really appreciate this lush look. And, look at all of these shoots. I think there's there must be 10, 11, 12 different vines on this plant at the moment. So there's growth points everywhere, and I honestly just keep chopping them because I don't know what to do with it. The pole is absolutely chock-a-block with vines already, so I can't really fit anything onto that moss pole anymore. I should probably do something with it. You can see that some leaves at the bottom start dropping off, so it's starting to get a little bit empty. So once this kind of advances a little bit more, I'll probably just chop it, pot it back up, and then re-extend it. But at this stage, I really like the look, and I really just didn't want to do any work on it. I have no desire to make it mature any further. I want it to look like this, kind of. So yeah, I think it's the only one where I'm kind of behind with my chop and extends, because normally I'm like excited to do chop and extend because it's like my opportunity to make the plant mature further. But with this one, I don't know. I just kind of like it the way that it looks right now, and it's nice to have a plant that is so low maintenance. I think I've done nothing but water this plant for like a year. I haven't done any work with it, any repotting or so on. So it's a good change. All right, let's stick with the ones that all look really similar. So you guys hopefully can see a bit of a difference. So this is Philodendron gigas, however you want to pronounce it. And those three, so the Milano, the micans, and the gigas, are very often confused, especially when they're juvenile, because they all have this really nice dark foliage. So, people get them confused when they're small. Now, once you grow them, once you've seen them in real life, I think it's pretty easy to actually differentiate. This one is much more like teardrop shaped, whereas the Milano has more distinct like little ears, and the Milano is also more elongated, whereas the micans is much more heart shaped. Also, you can tell by the petiole, like the gigas has like this really unique way of, I don't know how to actually say it, like I don't know how to describe these features. I can just show you, but the way that the petioles open almost, like I don't know if you can see that, like I'll insert a video, like that is really unique to the gigas compared to the way that the Milano grows its petioles, and then the micans obviously completely different. So I don't know, like to me it's really easy to differentiate between them, but I've grown all three of these for like over a year and a half or so. So yeah, anyway. So these gigas, actually I bought one 2 years ago, and it had thrips, and I isolated it when it had thrips. And the thing is, when I isolated it, I just moved into this new apartment, and I wasn't really aware of the sun movement, and I isolated it next to the window, and then the sun came around, and honestly within a couple of hours it turned into complete mush. Like it was just black mush. It was absolutely roasted by the sun in combination with the pest treatment. So yeah, that was the first one that I had. So I got a second one only around about maybe a year or so ago. So this plant in itself is only, I think it's only been on this moss pot for maybe a year. And it already had a chop and extend as well. So these were not the juvenile leaves. There was another 90 centimeter pole below that, which was chopped. So now it's almost at the top of its third pole, and it's slowly starting to increase in leaf size. It's also one of those that I believe wants a lot of light, so it's actually the closest to the window in the bedroom, so it should get the most natural light. And it has these amazing red colored leaves when it first unfurls. Yeah, it's called gigas because it can grow really, really large. So in nature, when they climb up trees, they can get gigantic leaves. And that's really what I'm aiming for. But at this stage, it's taking a little bit longer than some of these hybrids behind me. But that's, again, super okay. It gives me this really nice compact pole that doesn't take up too much space. So I'm having a good time taking care of this. All right, it's getting a little trickier. Let's go with the next one. All right. I don't know if you can see this. I don't know if you can see this newest leaf at the top over here, but there's just a new leaf that just unfurled, which looks amazing. All right. So next, one of my current favorites, Philodendron Splendid. Philodendron Splendid is a hybrid of Philodendron verrucosum, which we're going to look at in a sec, and Philodendron melanochrysum, which I showed you at the beginning. So I didn't make these hybrids. These are well-known hybrids out there that are, at least over here in Australia, quite readily available. Not the cheapest, but they have come down in price a lot over the last 2 years, right? So maybe 2 years ago, you would have still paid a good, almost like probably for like a small plant, you would have paid like $700, right? And now you can easily get them for 50. So if you live in a country where the prices are currently going crazy, just wait it out. The price will eventually come down, right? These plants keep growing. Because they keep growing, there's almost like an endless supply eventually, and the demand will die down. So, and I know these plants, they were all ridiculously expensive. Most of these were ridiculously expensive over 2 years ago in Australia. So when I actually started getting into this habit, I started getting all of these through swaps. I don't want to spend like my entire savings on plants, but if you get one and you grow it and then you propagate it and then you swap it with somebody else who's done the same, then, eventually like you just swap plants and you can grow your collection without actually having to purchase any of them. But yeah, anyway, where I was going with this, plant prices in countries are very different because it always is subject to demand and supply, right? So over here in Australia, we had very, very little supply a couple of years ago because we can't import plants from overseas due to biosecurity laws. But over those last 2 years, some companies have started producing these plants through tissue culture. So they're basically producing them in a lab, growing them from like, I think, stem cells essentially. So now that they are tissue cultured, they can basically be reproduced extremely quickly in very large quantities, which means that we suddenly have a huge supply available, but we don't have that many people in Australia and not that many people that want to grow all of these varieties of plants, right? So now actually the supply is out. We have more supply than we have demand, and hence these prices have come down a lot. That will be the case in your country eventually as well, right? Eventually, there's so many people that have the plant, they're all propagating it, so the market will eventually be flooded and there will be less people that want to purchase this plant as well, right? So trust me, if these plants are really expensive in your country at the moment, just wait it out a little bit. In a year's time, the prices could look completely different. And in the meantime, I would just recommend to work on propagating your own plants so you can swap plants in the meantime. But again, your money, you can do whatever you want with your money, and I'm going to do whatever I want with my money. So let's stop talking about money. Actually, I don't like talking about it, so I don't really know why I got into this rant. Okay. let's talk about Philodendron Splendid. So as I said, it's a hybrid of verrucosum and melanochrysum, and it's quite obvious that it does have, like in the parentage is quite obvious. Right? So you obviously have these elongated dark leaves that come very much after the melano, but it also has these slightly red backs. Now the red backs are more dominant when the leaf first comes out, and that's really coming from that verrucosum parentage. Melanos have very smooth petioles, verrucosums have hairy petioles, and the Splendid has kind of like rough petioles. Not hairy, but not smooth. As always with hybrids, one or the other parentage can be a little bit more dominant, so there's quite a lot of variation when it comes to hybrids, but I believe this one is fairly, like, I've seen, like, I feel like I haven't seen too much variety with Splendids. They all look fairly similar, and they always have this cute little red sinus, which I really like. Because it's a hybrid, I like to kind of explain it in the wise words of our friend Hannah Montana. They get the best of both worlds. So hybrids are usually much easier to grow, more pest resistant, more resistance to fluctuations in conditions and so on, because they're kind of combining the best parts of both plants. So basically, because it's a hybrid, it is much easier to grow compared to the individual species that make the parent species. So I would highly recommend this as a plant to start off with if you want to get into your velvets. I got this a year later than the Milano, and it started off with a similar size cutting, and it has matured so much faster. This has also already been chopped twice, so it had 2 chop and extends. So I've had plenty of cuttings that I was able to swap and share with other people as well. So highly recommend Philodendron Splendid if you want to get into velvets, but you're not quite sure if you've got the right conditions for them. All right, maybe just because we were talking about verrucosum, let's get the verrucosum next. Look at this! Look at this! Yeah. All right, Philodendron verrucosum. It is my absolute favorite plant. It's been my favorite plant when I first started collecting plants, and 2.5 years later, or almost 3 years later, it's still my favorite plant. I love it, but it is not the easiest to take care of. So it currently has just given me this brand new leaf, and you can see how amazing the veining is in these new leaves. It is because the backs of the leaves are really, really deep red. As the plant as these leaves get older, the red kind of fades, so it kind of goes really pale. Overall, verrucosum leaves don't have a very long lifespan at all. They are very paper thin. They very quickly get spider mites. They very easily just rip if you move your plants around and so on. So yeah, they want a lot of humidity. So there are so many reasons why these leaves can get messed up, and so little reason, so much that you kind of need to do to keep them looking nice. So really, the way I deal with these leaves deteriorating so quickly is I consistently chop this plant, right? So this plant grows with very, very large internodal spacing, like probably this much space between each leaf, which means it climbs the length of a moss pole really quickly, which I use to my advantage. By the time it reaches the top, and the top has really nice, beautiful leaves, the bottom looks ugly. So I just chop it off, repot it, re-extend it, and so on. So this has gone through, I don't know, I think 3 chop and extends already. It's grown up a lot of moss poles. So if I would have never chopped it, this moss pole would have probably been like 4 meters tall, but the bottom 3 meters would be absolutely empty, right? Because all the leaves would have fallen off or looked so ugly that I wanted to cut them off. I do have 2 plants on here, actually 3. There's a little one that I added later on, but it hasn't really grown much, so you can't really see the 3rd one at all. So there's 2. There's this is the newest leaf of the top shoot, and then this is the newest leaf of the other shoot. I also noticed that the internodal spacing is kind of decreasing as the plant matures, so this more mature cutting is actually growing up slower than the less mature cutting. So yeah, I suppose the less mature cutting will reach the top first, so I might just chop it and then I put it back to the base of the pot as well, so I can make it a little lusher. Because it has such large internodal spacing, if you just have 1 plant on there, it would look really, really empty. But because I've got 2 or soon 3 on here, it kind of fills in the gaps quite nicely. It has these most amazing hairy petioles. I don't know if you can see this over here. And yeah, I'm just in love with it because I love the red backs and I love a good challenge, right? I love a plant that is supposed to be really tricky to grow, but I just managed to make it actually thrive. Like it gives me this like, yeah, moment, right? It gives me like this proud plant moment that I wanted. And not exactly sure what that is, but I think it's giving me my first inflorescence as well. So it's clearly happy. It is a more high altitude velvet philodendron, so it appreciates really high humidity, but not such hot temperatures. So it usually thrives during winter, and then summer it still grows, but it prefers the cooler temperatures. But really high humidity. The higher you can get the humidity, the better. Anyway. Verrucosum is also used in another hybrid that I really, really appreciate. The other hybrid is Philodendron Majestic. So let's have a look at that. Alrighty, Philodendron Majestic. It just had a cut last week because it was growing absolutely out of control. I'll put a photo up on screen. It was growing huge, and I have no idea why it was maturing so incredibly quickly. As it matures, it also loses the silver splotches, so I didn't really like it. So I figured I will cut it back. So there's only 2 leaves on this pole left now, but also the caterpillar over here. So because I cut it back and it has much less leaves and a smaller root system available now, I'm expecting this to kind of go back to juvenile leaves, which is what I'm after. With most of my plants, I like to grow to maturity, but I didn't actually appreciate what this plant grew into once it matured fully. So I wanted to go back to juvenile, but I'll pop in some photos of what they looked like when they were smaller. And I reckon you'd agree with me that these leaves at the beginning of its life cycle actually looked much nicer than towards the end. But of course, leaf size is also impressive, but I don't have enough room, right? Unless I absolutely love a plant in its mature form, I'm not going to waste all of that space on it. Anyway, it's technically not a velvet plant, right? So I'm kind of including it here more because it's kind of associated with the verrucosum because it's a hybrid of verrucosum. It has red backs. Again, this red back fades over time, but when you look at the photos on screen with the new leaves, you can really see these neon green veining, and then the dark bits in between. These dark bits are because the back is red, and then, you know, it gives it this really intense veining when it first comes out. It has similar rough petioles to the Splendid, and that's because it has the parentage of verrucosum, and the other parentage is sodiroi down here, which has more smoother petioles. It often gets confused with sodiroi because they look really similar, and when juvenile, it also has the silver splotches that sodiroi has, but sodiroi has completely like plain backs but red veining, whereas the Splendid has, while it has the red veining as well, it has these red backs that definitely come after the verrucosum parentage. So yeah, anyway, I just thought I'd quickly include it in here because it's related. All right, and then just for completion purposes, let's quickly talk about the sodiroi. So this is the sodiroi. Again, not velvet, but it is used to make the Majestic by crossing sodiroi with verrucosum. And you can definitely see that this Majestic also has very distinct features of each parent, right? It has these silver splotches from the sodiroi, but it has the nice red backs from the verrucosum. So yeah, and it, you know, it has these beautiful heart-shaped leaves. So it kind of, you know, to me, they belong to the same family, kind of, you know, they're like all a happy velvet family. Just the sodiroi brings a little bit of gloss into the world. All right, Philodendron Gloriosum is the second velvet philo that I've got right after the micans, but the first more like, you know, mature one, or the one that a lot of people kind of associate with velvet philodendrons, right? It's a very, usually quite readily available. There's different varieties as well. In Australia, I believe this is the one that is most commonly sold over here. I haven't actually seen any other ones, but I've seen overseas that there's other types that have really amazing white veining as well, or like more pink backs and so on. So there are a few different types. They don't all look the same. But yeah, it is the only crawling velvet philodendron that I've got in my collection, and actually the only one that I'm really aware of, unless there's any other hybrids. It's now pushing out a new leaf over here, happy days, and it reached the end of its pot. So I really need to start doing something with it. I've really had the hardest time with this one for the last 2.5 years, or the first 1.5 years out of the 2.5 years that I've had it. I've had a hard time with it. I just don't get along with crawlers. I really like growing plants on moss poles, and I'm kind of really good at anticipating what they need and when they need it and so on. But with crawlers, I've had the hardest time kind of learning what they need and when they need it. So I kind of had root rot a lot, and maybe I had the wrong medium. I'm not too sure. But since I switched to these pots over here, and I've got a video on all my crawling philodendron as well, so check that one out, and I linked the pots in the description as well. But since I started using these rectangular pots for them to just crawl in, it seems to be better, and I haven't really had any issues, so happy days. Again, if you want to learn more about crawlers, check out the specific video. Now, gloriosum often gets confused with the monster behind me. All right, so I get that a lot. How did you manage to make your Philodendron Gloriosum climb up a moss pole? Well, I didn't. This is not Philodendron Gloriosum. This is Philodendron Glorious. Don't know who named these, and I don't know why they managed to, I don't know why they decided to name them so similar, but Philodendron Glorious is a hybrid of Philodendron Gloriosum and Philodendron melanochrysum to your left, right? So it has the, again, best of both worlds. It's a hybrid, and it grows really, really quickly and really large without really needing amazing conditions, right? These have all just grown up in an indoor environment. On that note as well, I never buy mature specimen. I always buy or swap small plants, and I put them on a moss pole when they're tiny, so that the plant can really use the moss pole to its full advantage, but also so that the plant is used to growing up in my environment. So all of these plants have grown from being juvenile to maturity in my environment. That's why they're happy in my environment. If they would have grown in a perfect greenhouse with like 90% humidity and tropical conditions to maturity, and then you take the mature specimen and you pop them into your dark apartment. I mean, not dark, my apartment is definitely not dark, but you pop them into your apartment, they will definitely suffer, right? It's just like you just taken them out of the environment that they're grown in their entire life, and you expect them to just pretend like nothing happened. Imagine that would happen to you. You would definitely struggle a little bit at the beginning, and then you would reestablish yourself, right? But because I always start with small cuttings, they're already used to my environment. It is, as I said, it's a hybrid between the gloriosum and the melano, and it definitely comes after both parents as well, right? It definitely has the beautiful, like, roundish leaves of the glorious, but it also has the elongation of a mature melano leaf. It has the darkness of the melano leaf as well. And it has the size of the melano leaf, or at least the melanos could grow really large as well. Not mine in particular, but yeah. Now, again, with hybrids, there can be differences. I've seen glorious that are more rounded and lighter in color. I definitely think mine is a little bit darker and more elongated, which means that the melano parentage is probably a little bit more dominant. But overall, I can definitely tell that the melano parentage is dominant because it also climbs, right? The gloriosum is a crawler, whereas the melano is a climber, and this one definitely likes to climb, and it's also given me my first inflow the other day. Yay! So it's definitely really, really happy. It has also had a chop and extend twice already. That's how I got it to mature, and I have a specific plant spotlight just on this plant showing you the 2 years of growth journey that we've been through together. So if you're interested in that, please check it out. It's in my plant spotlight series. Yeah, and I think, looking around, I think I covered them all. So I think these are all of them. And I mean, really, again, despite the fact that some of these are species, some are hybrids, so some of these might not really exist in nature in the first place, and the ones that do exist in nature come from very different conditions. Like the verrucosum, for example, would grow at like high altitude cloud forests, and others might be a little bit more tropical, more hot, and so on, right? So despite the fact that they're all growing different conditions in nature, I can't give them all of, like, I can't give each plant different conditions. They all live in the same conditions in my bedroom, as I said, around about 60% humidity, somewhere between 20 to 28 degrees Celsius, consistent airflow and decent light from an east-north facing window, and supplemented by grow lights, right? So have a look at the setup if you want to learn more about it. But ultimately, I feel like it's a setup that is kind of a compromise that suits all of them, right? It means that plants like the Melano aren't maybe thriving in the way that they could because they would appreciate better conditions. Maybe the verrucosum is going to thrive more during winter, not so much during summer, right? So there's definitely some compromises that I have to take. But overall, I mean, I really can't complain about the growth that all of these plants have shown, given that I'm just giving them the same conditions and I'm hoping they're going to be okay with it. All right, I think that's really all I've got to say about my velvets. I'll call it a day. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I really appreciate your engagement, and I'll see you next time around. Take care and happy growing. Bye.